The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the 12th District Police Station in Chicago, casting long shadows across the worn tile floor. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paperwork, a scent that had become synonymous with the building over the years. Officer Mark Reynolds sat behind the front desk, his uniform slightly wrinkled, tapping a pen against a notepad as he scrolled through his phone. He wasn't paying much attention to the few people waiting in the lobby, most of whom were there for minor issues, lost IDs, noise complaints, or parking tickets. Reynolds was known around the precinct as someone who didn't mince words. His reputation preceded him: blunt, impatient, and often rude, especially when dealing with certain groups of people. Some colleagues whispered about how he treated black residents differently, but no one ever dared to confront him directly. Complaints against him rarely stuck because they lacked hard evidence, or so the higher-ups claimed. For now, he was just another officer doing his job, or at least pretending to do it. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the glass doors swung open, and a woman walked in. She stood out immediately, not just because she carried herself with an air of confidence, but also because she looked entirely out of place in the dingy station. Her dark hair was neatly styled, her suit crisp and professional, and her heels clicked softly against the floor as she approached the counter. This wasn't someone here for a traffic ticket or a missing pet. "Good morning," she said politely, placing a folder on the counter. "I'd like to file a formal complaint." Reynolds glanced up briefly, taking in her appearance before returning to his phone. "Take a number," he muttered dismissively, nodding toward a small machine mounted on the wall. "I already did," the woman replied, holding up a slip of paper labeled number 42. "It's my turn." Reynolds sighed loudly, clearly annoyed. He set his phone down and grabbed a clipboard, shoving it toward her without meeting her eyes. "Fill this out. Be quick about it." The woman hesitated for a moment, then picked up the pen attached to the clipboard. "My name is Maya Thompson," she began, speaking slowly and clearly. "I'm here to report ongoing harassment outside my apartment building. It's been escalating, and I believe it's racially motivated." Reynolds froze for a split second, his lips curling into a sneer. "Racially motivated," he repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You sure it's not just your neighbors getting tired of loud music or trash piling up?" Maya blinked, caught off guard by the insinuation. "No, sir," she said firmly. "This isn't about noise or garbage. Someone has been leaving threatening notes on my car and yelling slurs whenever I walk by. I've documented everything. I even have photos." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Sounds like you're looking for attention. Maybe try talking to your landlord instead of wasting our time." The comment stung, but Maya refused to let it show. She opened the folder she'd brought with her, pulling out printed pictures and typed notes detailing each incident. "I'm not here for attention," she said evenly. "I'm here because I expect the police to take this seriously. Isn't that your job?" Her composure only seemed to irritate Reynolds further. He snatched the folder from her hands, flipping through the pages carelessly. Yeah, we'll look into it," he said, tossing it onto the desk. "But don't get your hopes up. People like you always think the world owes them something." His words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Maya felt a surge of anger bubbling inside her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "People like me," she echoed, raising an eyebrow. "What exactly does that mean?" Reynolds smirked, leaning forward. "Oh, come on. Don't play dumb. You know what I mean." And just like that, the tension in the room thickened. Other officers milling around nearby paused mid-conversation, sensing the brewing storm. What started as a routine visit to file a complaint was quickly spiraling into something far more volatile, and no one, least of all Reynolds, realized the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The air in the police station grew heavy as Maya stared at Officer Reynolds, her calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside her. She had dealt with difficult people before, clients who doubted her abilities, colleagues who underestimated her, but this felt different. This wasn't just dismissiveness. It was something uglier, more personal. And Maya knew exactly what it was. "Let me make one thing clear," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not here to argue with you or waste your time. I came here because I believed you could help. If you don't want to take my complaint seriously, fine, but don't insult me while doing it." Reynolds' smirk widened, and he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Insult? Who's insulting anyone? I'm just telling it like it is. You show up here with your fancy folder and big words, expecting special treatment. Newsflash, life doesn't work that way." Maya clenched her fists under the counter, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to walk away, to leave the station and never look back. But deep down, she knew that wouldn't solve anything. Walking away would mean letting him win, letting his attitude go unchecked. That wasn't an option. "I didn't ask for special treatment," she replied, her tone icy now. "I asked for basic respect, for professionalism. Is that too much to expect from someone in your position?" Reynolds let out a short, humorless laugh. "Respect is earned, sweetheart, not handed out like candy." The word sweetheart hit Maya like a slap. It wasn't just condescending. It was calculated, meant to belittle her. She took a step closer to the counter, her eyes locked on his. "You know what? Forget the complaint. Clearly, you're incapable of handling it properly. But mark my words, this isn't over." "Oh, I'm shaking." Reynolds shot back, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Go ahead, run off to your lawyer friends, or whoever you think can save you. See if I care." By now, the entire room had gone silent. Other officers who had been pretending not to listen were frozen in place, watching the exchange unfold with a mix of discomfort and curiosity. A young officer named Daniels shifted nervously near the water cooler, unsure whether to intervene. Even the janitor paused mid-sweep, glancing between Maya and Reynolds with wide eyes. Maya opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself. Arguing further would only give Reynolds the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. Instead, she grabbed her folder from the desk, tucking it neatly under her arm. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, her voice low but laced with warning. Then, without another word, she turned and headed toward the exit. As the glass doors swung shut behind her, the tension in the room snapped like a rubber band. Reynolds sat back in his chair, looking smug, as though he'd won some kind of victory. Daniels hesitated for a moment before approaching him cautiously. Mark," he said, keeping his voice low. "Do you think maybe you went a little too far there?" Reynolds waved him off dismissively. "Relax, kid. She's nobody. Just another complainer looking for attention. Trust me, she'll forget all about this by tomorrow." But Daniels wasn't so sure. Something about the way Maya carried herself, the quiet strength in her gaze, the precision in her words, stuck with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that Reynolds had underestimated her. Big time. Meanwhile, outside the station, Maya stood on the sidewalk, taking slow, deliberate breaths to steady herself. Her heart was racing, partly from anger and partly from adrenaline. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. Tapping the screen, she pressed the phone to her ear. "This is Evelyn Carter," a crisp voice answered after 2 rings. "It's Maya," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "I need your help. Something happened at the precinct, and I think we might have a bigger problem on our hands than I realized." Evelyn paused, sensing the urgency in Maya's tone. "Tell me everything," she said. As Maya recounted the events of the morning, she felt a spark of determination ignite within her. Reynolds thought he could intimidate her, humiliate her, and send her away like countless others before her. But he had no idea who he was dealing with, or how far-reaching the consequences of his actions would be. Maya's call with Evelyn Carter ended abruptly when the glass doors of the police station burst open behind her. She turned just in time to see Officer Reynolds storming out, his face flushed with anger. He must have realized she wasn't bluffing about taking action. Perhaps he'd overheard her talking on the phone or sensed that this wouldn't end quietly. Whatever the reason, he looked ready to escalate things further. "You think you can threaten me?" Reynolds barked, pointing a finger at her. "You come into my station, waste my time, and then try to pull some high and mighty act. I don't care who you call. You're not gonna intimidate me." Maya took a step back, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected him to follow her outside, but now that he was here, she refused to let fear take over. "I didn't threaten you," she said firmly, holding her ground. "I simply stated the truth. What happens next is entirely up to you." "Oh, spare me the lecture," Reynolds snapped, stepping closer. His voice carried an edge of mockery, as if he were daring her to push back. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Showing up all dressed up, thinking you're better than everyone else." "I didn't say I'm better than anyone." Maya shot back, her voice rising slightly despite her best efforts to stay composed. "But I do know my rights. And yours too, apparently. You're supposed to protect people, not harass them." Reynolds scoffed, shaking his head. "Protect you? Please, you're just like every other entitled." Before he could finish his sentence, something inside him seemed to snap. Whether it was frustration, pride, or pure rage, no one could say for sure. But in one swift motion, he lunged forward, grabbing Maya by the arm and yanking her toward him. The folder slipped from her grasp, scattering papers across the sidewalk. Time seemed to freeze as gasps erupted from bystanders nearby. For a moment, Maya thought he might shove her away or worse. Instead, his fist connected with her jaw in a brutal punch that sent her stumbling backward. Pain exploded across her face, and she fell to the ground, stunned and disoriented. The sound of the impact echoed through the street, drawing immediate attention. Pedestrians stopped in their tracks. Phones whipped out instinctively to record the scene. Inside the station, officers scrambled to react, spilling onto the sidewalk as chaos erupted. Daniels, the young officer who had earlier questioned Reynolds' behavior, rushed forward, shouting for him to stop. "What are you doing?" Daniels yelled, pulling Reynolds away from Maya. "Are you insane?" Reynolds stumbled back, breathing heavily, his expression a mix of shock and defiance. It was as if he hadn't fully processed what he'd just done. Other officers surrounded him, trying to restrain him while someone knelt beside Maya, asking if she was okay. She didn't answer right away. Her hand went to her cheek, which throbbed painfully. Tears welled in her eyes, not from weakness, but from sheer disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A simple complaint about harassment had turned into a violent assault, all because of one man's unchecked prejudice. As paramedics arrived to check on her injuries, Maya sat silently on the curb, her mind racing. She could hear fragments of conversation around her. Officers whispering nervously, bystanders murmuring about calling the news, Reynolds yelling defensively that she started it. None of it mattered. Not anymore. When a medic asked if she wanted to go to the hospital, Maya shook her head. "No," she said softly, her voice trembling with resolve. "Call Evelyn Carter. Tell her to meet me here." Her words carried weight, even in her weakened state. Whoever Evelyn was, it was clear she held power. And whatever happened next would change everything. As cameras flashed and reporters began arriving on the scene, Maya knew one thing for certain. Reynolds had made a grave mistake, and soon the whole world would know exactly who she really was. It didn't take long for Evelyn Carter to arrive. Her sleek black sedan screeched to a halt at the edge of the chaos, and she stepped out with an air of authority that silenced the murmurs around her. Dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer and heels, Evelyn exuded confidence and purpose. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene, the scattered papers on the ground, Maya sitting on the curb with an ice pack pressed to her face, and Officer Reynolds being escorted back into the station by 2 officers. Evelyn moved quickly, crouching beside Maya. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice calm, but tinged with urgency. Maya nodded, wincing slightly as she adjusted the ice pack. "I've been better," she said through gritted teeth. "But I'll live." Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder before standing up to address the growing crowd. Reporters had already gathered, microphones thrust forward, as they shouted questions about what had happened. Bystanders whispered among themselves, some filming the scene on their phones, while others looked on in stunned disbelief. The tension was palpable, and Evelyn knew this moment would define how the story unfolded. "Listen up." Evelyn's commanding voice cut through the noise like a knife. She held up a hand, signaling for silence. Slowly, the chatter died down, and all eyes turned to her. "This is Assistant State Attorney Evelyn Carter," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The woman you see here, Maya Thompson, is not just any citizen. She is a highly respected civil rights attorney working directly under the Illinois Attorney General. And let me make one thing crystal clear. What happened here today will not go unanswered." Her words sent ripples through the crowd. Gasps erupted, and reporters scrambled to jot notes or adjust their cameras. Even the officers standing nearby exchanged uneasy glances. No one had anticipated this twist. Not the paramedics, not the bystanders, and certainly not Officer Reynolds, who was now watching from inside the station through the glass doors, his face pale. Evelyn turned to Maya, offering her a hand to help her stand. "Can you walk?" she asked gently. When Maya nodded, Evelyn guided her toward the car, shielding her from the cameras and reporters swarming around them. Before getting into the vehicle, Evelyn paused and addressed the crowd once more. "To the people of Chicago," she said, her tone unwavering, "this is not just an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a much larger problem. A culture of abuse and impunity that has gone unchecked for far too long. But rest assured, we are going to change that. Starting today." With that, she opened the car door, helping Maya inside before sliding into the driver's seat. As the engine roared to life, the reporters surged forward, shouting more questions, but Evelyn ignored them, focusing instead on getting Maya to safety. Inside the car, Maya leaned her head against the seat, closing her eyes for a moment. The pain in her jaw throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the anger simmering beneath the surface. "He had no idea who I was," she murmured, almost to herself. "No idea what he was stepping into." Evelyn glanced at her, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Well, he knows now," she said firmly. "And trust me, he's going to regret it." As they drove away, news vans began rolling out of the area, racing to file their reports. Social media lit up with videos and photos of the altercation, hashtags trending within minutes. Hashtag Justice for Maya started circulating alongside calls for accountability and reform. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, panic set in among the higher-ups. Phone calls flew between department heads, union representatives, and city officials, each trying to figure out how to contain the fallout. Officer Reynolds, still reeling from the events, sat slumped in a chair in the break room, staring blankly at the wall. For the first time in his career, he felt a flicker of doubt. Who exactly had he crossed? And what kind of storm was headed his way? Unbeknownst to him, Maya and Evelyn were already planning their next move. This wasn't just about seeking justice for one act of violence. It was about exposing the systemic rot that had allowed such behavior to thrive in the first place. And Maya, despite the pain she was in, felt a renewed sense of determination. If Reynolds thought she was powerless, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The days following the incident felt like a whirlwind for Maya and Evelyn. News of the altercation spread like wildfire, dominating headlines not just in Chicago but across the country. Footage of Reynolds punching Maya outside the police station went viral, sparking outrage on social media and fueling protests in front of the precinct. The hashtag Justice for Maya became a rallying cry, with thousands sharing posts calling for accountability and systemic change. Inside the 12th District Police Station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers who had once joked about Reynolds' brash behavior now avoided eye contact with him altogether. Department leaders scrambled to distance themselves from the incident, issuing vague statements about conduct unbecoming and promising a thorough investigation. But behind closed doors, panic set in. They knew this wasn't just another complaint. It was a full-blown crisis that could tarnish the department's already shaky reputation. Meanwhile, Maya and Evelyn wasted no time preparing their case. Sitting in Evelyn's downtown office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and news clippings, they mapped out their strategy. Maya insisted on filing both criminal charges against Reynolds and a civil lawsuit targeting the department for enabling his actions. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice firm despite the bruises still visible on her face. "It's about every person who's been treated like they don't matter because of the color of their skin." Evelyn nodded, leaning forward in her chair. "We'll make sure this case exposes more than just one bad cop. We're going after the system itself, the policies, the culture, everything that lets people like Reynolds think they can act without consequence." As word of the impending lawsuit spread, public pressure mounted. Protesters gathered daily outside the police station, holding signs that read "Accountability now" and "No justice, no peace." Community leaders joined the chorus, demanding reforms such as mandatory bias training, body cameras for all officers, and independent oversight boards. Even some rank-and-file officers spoke out anonymously, admitting that Reynolds' behavior was emblematic of deeper issues within the force. Reynolds, suspended pending investigation, tried to defend himself in interviews, claiming he'd been provoked and that Maya had disrespected him. His comments only made things worse, drawing widespread condemnation. Clips of his past interactions with citizens surfaced online, painting a damning picture of a man whose temper often crossed the line into abuse. One video showed him berating a teenager during a routine traffic stop. Another captured him using excessive force during an arrest. Each revelation chipped away at whatever support he might have had left. Back at Evelyn's office, Maya reviewed witness statements and evidence collected so far. Every testimonial reinforced what she already knew. This wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a pattern, a toxic culture that shielded officers like Reynolds while leaving marginalized communities vulnerable. Determined to shine a light on these injustices, Maya decided to speak publicly for the first time since the incident. Standing alongside Evelyn at a press conference, Maya addressed a packed room of reporters. Her presence was commanding, her words deliberate. "What happened to me isn't unique," she began, her voice steady despite the raw emotion in her eyes. "Every day, countless individuals are subjected to harassment, discrimination, and violence at the hands of those sworn to protect them. I'm here today not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever felt powerless in the face of injustice." The crowd erupted in applause, and cameras flashed non-stop as Maya continued. She outlined the goals of the lawsuit: holding Reynolds accountable, implementing sweeping reforms within the department, and creating safeguards to prevent similar incidents in the future. By the end of her speech, tears streamed down the faces of many in attendance, not just because of Maya's courage, but because her words resonated so deeply. As the press conference wrapped up, Evelyn leaned over and whispered to Maya, "You just changed the game." Maya smiled faintly, though her expression remained resolute. "It's not over yet," she replied, "but we're getting closer." Outside, the protests grew louder, echoing her determination. For the first time in years, it felt like real change might finally be within reach. And standing at the center of it all was Maya Thompson, a woman who refused to back down, no matter the cost. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial began, drawing crowds of reporters, activists, and curious citizens. Every seat was filled, and even the aisles were lined with people eager to witness what many were calling a landmark case. At the center of it all sat Maya Thompson, her face still bearing faint traces of the bruises she'd endured. Beside her, Evelyn Carter shuffled through stacks of documents, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any sign of weakness from the opposing side. Officer Mark Reynolds, dressed in a suit instead of his uniform, looked markedly different from the man who had stormed out of the police station weeks earlier. His usual arrogance seemed muted, replaced by a nervous energy that betrayed his confidence. Across the aisle, lawyers representing the Chicago Police Department exchanged hurried whispers, their faces pale with concern. They knew this wasn't just about one officer. It was about exposing decades of systemic failures. As the prosecution presented its case, the courtroom became a stage for raw truths. Witness after witness took the stand, recounting stories of mistreatment at the hands of officers like Reynolds. A young mother described being pulled over repeatedly for no reason other than driving through predominantly black neighborhoods. An elderly man recounted how he'd been handcuffed and detained for hours simply because his name matched someone on a vague warrant list. Each story added weight to Maya's argument. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. When Maya herself took the stand, the room fell silent. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted the events leading up to the assault, but her composure never wavered. She spoke directly to the jury, making eye contact with each member. "I didn't ask for special treatment," she said firmly. "I asked for fairness, for dignity. What I got instead was violence, not just against me, but against every person who has ever felt powerless when facing law enforcement." Reynolds' defense team tried to paint him as a victim of circumstance, arguing that he'd acted under pressure and provocation. But their attempts fell flat when video evidence played on a large screen showed Reynolds escalating the situation without cause. The footage left the jury visibly shaken, and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Evelyn delivered the closing arguments for the prosecution, her words cutting like a blade. "This isn't just about Officer Reynolds," she declared, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "It's about a system that allows officers like him to act with impunity. It's about policies that fail to hold them accountable. And it's about the countless lives damaged by prejudice masquerading as authority." Her final statement lingered in the air as she turned to face the jury. "You have the power to send a message, not just to this department, but to every department across the country. You can say enough is enough. Let today be the day we start building a justice system that truly serves everyone." The courtroom erupted into applause before the judge quickly called for order. As the jury retreated to deliberate, the tension inside the room reached a fever pitch. Reporters rushed outside to file updates, while supporters gathered in the hallway, holding signs and chanting slogans. Protesters outside the courthouse held vigils, lighting candles in solidarity with Maya and others who had suffered similar injustices. For Maya, the wait was agonizing. Sitting beside Evelyn, she stared at the floor, replaying every moment of the trial in her mind. Had they done enough? Would the jury see the bigger picture, or would they focus solely on Reynolds' actions? Hours passed, stretching into what felt like days. Finally, the foreman returned with the verdict. Everyone rose to their feet as the judge read the decision aloud. "Guilty on all counts." Gasps filled the room, followed by cheers so loud they echoed through the halls. Outside, protesters erupted in celebration, tears streaming down faces as strangers embraced one another. But Maya remained seated, her expression unreadable. This victory was significant, yes, but she knew it was only the beginning. The fight for real change wouldn't end here. Still, as Evelyn placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "We did it," Maya allowed herself a small smile. Justice had been served. For now. The guilty verdict sent shockwaves through the courtroom, and for a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. Officer Mark Reynolds sat motionless, his face pale and his jaw clenched tightly. The once defiant man who had sneered at Maya in the police station now looked like someone who finally understood the gravity of his actions, or perhaps the weight of their consequences. His attorney whispered something into his ear, but Reynolds didn't respond. Instead, he stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. For Maya, the verdict brought a mix of emotions. Relief washed over her first, the kind that comes when justice is served after months of fighting against seemingly insurmountable odds. But beneath the relief was anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about punishing one man. It was about dismantling the system that allowed him to act with impunity. And while the jury's decision marked a significant step forward, Maya knew there was still so much work to be done. As the judge announced Reynolds' sentencing, 3 years in prison without parole, along with mandatory sensitivity training, the crowd erupted again. Supporters cheered loudly, some even breaking into chants of "No more racism." Meanwhile, reporters scrambled to capture every reaction, their cameras flashing nonstop. Outside the courthouse, the celebrations continued, with protesters dancing, singing, and embracing one another. For many, this verdict represented hope, a sign that change was possible. But Maya refused to get swept up in the euphoria. After thanking Evelyn and the legal team, she stepped outside to address the crowd gathered near the courthouse steps. The noise quieted almost instantly as people turned to listen. Standing tall despite her lingering injuries, Maya spoke with clarity and conviction. "This victory belongs to all of you," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they don't matter. To those who have stood up, spoken out, and demanded better, even when it felt impossible." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Yes, we held one man accountable today. But let's not forget, this case exposed something much bigger than him. It showed us how deeply rooted these problems are, and how far we still have to go. We cannot stop here. Real change requires action beyond courtrooms and headlines. It demands new policies, stronger safeguards, and a commitment to treating every human being with dignity and respect." Her words resonated deeply, earning applause and cheers from the crowd. But Maya wasn't finished yet. She went on to outline specific reforms she planned to push for, including independent oversight boards, stricter accountability measures, and comprehensive bias training for law enforcement officers. "We need systems that protect everyone, not just some," she said firmly. "And I promise you, I will keep fighting until that happens." Inside the courthouse, Reynolds' colleagues watched silently as bailiffs led him away in handcuffs. Some looked ashamed, others angry, but none dared to speak publicly in his defense. Higher-ranking officials issued carefully worded statements condemning his actions while vowing to rebuild trust with the community. Yet behind closed doors, debates raged about whether this verdict would lead to meaningful reform or simply serve as a temporary distraction. That evening, as the celebrations died down and the streets emptied, Maya returned to Evelyn's office to debrief. Exhaustion lined her face, but her eyes remained bright with determination. "This isn't the end," she said quietly, sipping a cup of tea Evelyn had handed her. "In fact, it's barely the beginning." Evelyn nodded, leaning back in her chair. "You've already made history, Maya. People are watching now. They're listening. That gives us leverage to push harder than ever before." Maya smiled faintly, glancing out the window at the city skyline. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It never was. But she felt ready. Ready to challenge the status quo, to amplify voices that had long been ignored, and to build a future where no one else would have to endure what she had. As she set down her teacup, she whispered to herself, "Let's get to work." In the weeks following the trial, Chicago, and much of the nation, began to feel the ripple effects of the verdict. The case against Officer Mark Reynolds became a turning point, sparking conversations about accountability and reform that extended far beyond the courtroom. News outlets ran feature stories on Maya Thompson, highlighting her courage and determination. She was no longer just a victim of injustice. She was a symbol of resilience, a beacon for those who believed in the possibility of change. The Chicago Police Department found itself under intense scrutiny. Facing mounting public pressure, city officials announced sweeping reforms aimed at addressing systemic issues within the force. Among these changes were stricter use-of-force policies, mandatory body cameras for all officers, and the establishment of an independent oversight board to investigate misconduct complaints. Community leaders hailed the moves as long overdue steps toward transparency and fairness, though many cautioned that implementation would be key. Promises are one thing, Maya said during a press conference. Action is another. For Maya, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Her days were filled with meetings, interviews, and advocacy work as she partnered with grassroots organizations to push for broader policing reforms across Illinois. She traveled to other cities, sharing her story and urging lawmakers to adopt similar measures. Each speech she gave, each panel she joined, reinforced her belief that real progress was possible, but only if people stayed vigilant. Evelyn Carter remained by her side throughout it all, offering guidance and support. Together, they launched a legal clinic dedicated to helping individuals file complaints against law enforcement without fear of retaliation. The clinic quickly gained traction, drawing volunteers from law schools and local firms eager to contribute. For Maya, this initiative represented more than just a resource. It was proof that communities could come together to demand justice. Meanwhile, Officer Reynolds' imprisonment served as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. His name became synonymous with abuse and prejudice, often cited in discussions about police brutality. While some colleagues quietly visited him in jail, others distanced themselves entirely, fearing guilt by association. Inside the precinct, attitudes began to shift. Officers who had once dismissed concerns about bias now attended training sessions with renewed focus, knowing the stakes were higher than ever. As months passed, Maya noticed subtle signs of progress. More residents felt empowered to speak out about misconduct, confident that their voices would be heard. Young activists organized rallies and workshops, inspired by her example. Even children wrote letters to her, thanking her for standing up to bullies and vowing to do the same when faced with injustice. But Maya never let herself forget why this fight mattered so deeply. Late one evening, sitting alone in her apartment with a cup of tea, she scrolled through old photos on her phone. There was one from the day of the assault, a selfie she'd taken in the hospital mirror, her face bruised but her expression unbroken. It reminded her of how far she'd come and how much farther she still had to go. The next morning, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at a community center on Chicago's South Side. Hundreds of people had gathered to hear her speak, their faces hopeful yet determined. As she took the stage, applause erupted around her, echoing off the walls. When the noise finally subsided, she began simply, "Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step we take brings us closer to a world where everyone is treated equally." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. Outside, the sun rose over the city skyline, casting golden light onto streets lined with murals honoring resilience and unity. Somewhere in that glow, Maya saw hope, not just for herself, but for generations to come. And as she stepped off the stage, surrounded by supporters eager to continue the fight, she knew one thing for certain: the journey wasn't over. But together, they were building something stronger, brighter, and infinitely more just.